Welcome to the next session in the First Line Leader webinar series, Re-Inspire, Empower, and Engage Your Staff in 5 minutes. We're so glad you could join us. My name is Chris Bjork. I'm the Resources Director here at Creative Healthcare Management. I will be your moderator for today's session. Today's facilitators are Susan Wessel and Mary Strom. Susan, do you want to introduce Mary and then I will introduce you?
I am delighted to be partnering with Mary Strom today because of her deep leadership expertise and especially because she has so many practical tips for anyone in a management role. Mary has had all types of management roles, including at the executive level. But what I appreciate most about Mary is her passion for patients and families remains. And always, no matter what she's doing, she keeps that clearly in focus, that the core of our work is really providing the best for patients and families. That's probably because of her long years of experience as an oncology nurse and a clinical nurse specialist. And I guess the last thing I love about Mary is she has such expertise in caring. In the science of caring and the heart of caring. So looking forward to partnering with you today, Mary.
Susan has over 35 years of experience as a clinician, manager, director, vice president of patient care, and now is senior consultant. Susan is the lead author of Primary Nursing, a co-author of Advancing Relationship-Based Cultures, and an editor of the Relationship-Based Care Field Guide. Susan specializes in developing effective leaders and inspiring first-line caregivers to create innovative ways to improve their relationships and their day-to-day work. Susan, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, so Mary and I have put together a pathway today, kind of building from the bottom up, and we have selected leadership strategies that don't take much time. We've really tried to pull out some pearls of wisdom because we know time is always a challenge. So we'll talk about how to connect in a meaningful way with your staff through loving leadership. I'm going to introduce you to a quick tool called Appreciative Questions. Then we're going to talk about the importance of having clear and positive expectations. And finally, we will emphasize how important it is to have shared governance or some type of shared decision-making structure. So we're looking forward to the session. Okay, so the first section is connecting with staff through loving leadership. You know, it's interesting that finally in the literature is information about how our leadership really represents a deep caring and a type of love with our staff. And so one of the first tactics that we'd like to share with you is how to really be caring and loving presence with your staff. Specifically, you need to get to know them as people. And so particularly if you happen to be a newer leader, we have found it absolutely worth your time to have individual meetings with your team. Even if you're promoted from within, you're meeting with them with a new frame of reference and as their new leader. And so what we'd like to share with you is one possible format for those meetings. And you obviously can change this up, but this meeting wouldn't take more than 15 or 20 minutes. So you would greet your staff warmly, share the purpose to get to know them better, to find out what their hopes are, and also how they would best like support from you. The second item on that agenda may be for you to ask them to share what they consider their most important strengths and talents, so that you can really take advantage of those strengths. A question I especially like is, what are 2 things that work well in this department that we should keep and build upon? We always believe in starting with the positive. So that's a good thing. And then you can follow up with sharing 2 things that they would like to see improved upon, and particularly what their ideas are to help that happen. So that you would be taking notes and compiling, you know, what are the best strengths in the department and what your new team feels are areas for improvement. And then ask them what their career goals are. And if you know that person, share with them what you believe is their career potential. And finally, this is a really important question, is to ask your team, the individual people, what they need from you to help them be successful in their work and career. Because the best type of leadership is kind of situational leadership, where you would adjust your leadership style to the preferences of the staff. So that's our tactic number one, is the individual meetings. Tactic number two is something that we have identified works really well to build incredible loyalty, and that is if any one of your staff members has any kind of personal crisis, how you handle that leaves such a lasting impact. They will never forget it if you do a caring gesture whenever they're in some type of crisis. It just makes a huge difference, and it's interesting because staff will remember that for many, many years. It might be a death in their family or a crossroads in their career. And so this is something we want to invite you to think about. Just reflect for a minute on if you have a past experience with one of your leaders when you had some type of personal crisis, and think about how your leader responded. They may have responded to just right, or they may not have responded, which would also leave a lasting impact. We are going to invite you, after the webinar is finished, to share some of these with each other, because what I've learned is when you listen to different leaders sharing some of these examples, it just really provides great examples, really, of loving leadership. So I want to share one of mine that has stayed with me for years and years, and this is a long time ago. I was a manager, first-line manager, and I had been asked to cover a department that was in turmoil and had many open positions. And the staffing was a real challenge on the night shift. And in this one particular week, there were 2 times pretty close together where I had worked the whole day shift. Then at about 9:30 or 10 p.m., I was called on the phone to come back in and work the night shift. My chief nurse at the time, I wasn't complaining, I was trying to be a good soldier, but she realized that this was not going to be a tenable situation. So what she did, which even in retrospect is amazing, what she did is she closed some beds in that unit temporarily so that I would be able to do what was needed to get the unit back on track. I will never forget that. So I invite you to share some of your examples after our webinar. The third tactic, and this is a favorite of Mary's, is to have some type of annual mentoring meeting with your staff members. And this is not the same meeting as your performance review meeting, but to schedule an annual meeting, and perhaps what you learned from the individual interview you might want to follow up on. But you would do things such as finding out where they are and so forth. The second item here to connect with the staff is to lead through visibility, especially when there's stressful times or times of change. The more visible you can be, the better. And sometimes you may have to make an important decision between meetings and being in your department. The next tactic there is to share out loud what's important to you, what you value, and especially your beliefs about patients and families. I remember when I was a leader, sometimes I don't think I talked enough about my beliefs about patients and families because I was often worried about systems or staffing and schedules and so forth. Next is the magic of recognition and appreciation. One of Mary's favorite tactics was to carry just simple notes or Post-its with her so that she could jot down right away an appreciation or a thank you. What she realized was if she waited to the end of the day, often it just didn't get done. So the more you can have an easy way for yourself to do the appreciations, the better. And then finally, again, is visibility. And, you know, that's just being visible in the area, you know, making rounds. It shouldn't be uncomfortable or unusual for you to be visible. And the same goes for your office. It shouldn't be that the only time you have staff come in the office is when something is wrong. So those are some tactics that we think are pretty quick and work well in terms of connecting with your staff. The next major topic that we'd like to share is something called appreciative leadership, which is embedded in all of our work. And that is a way to create positive energy. And you may or may not have heard of a philosophy called appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiry was developed a number of years ago out of Case Western University by a gentleman named David Cooperrider and his colleagues. And what it is not is the way I was kind of raised in leadership. Traditionally, and especially years ago, we often thought that being a leader meant uncovering problems and, you know, figuring out what's not working and, you know, finding out what's not going well. And the problem is that the more you focus on problems, it just seems like, you know, the more problems there are. And so what we love about appreciative inquiry, instead of focusing on what's wrong, it is focusing on what's right so that you can expand on it. So the idea is that you search for solutions that already exist because always in any organization there are times that things work well. And then you have a dialogue about what is it that made that go so well. Find out what was behind that success, amplify it, and find out ways to make that happen more often. So that's, you know, there's a whole cycle to appreciative inquiry. But what I have learned to use is one piece of appreciative inquiry, and that is a tool called appreciative questions. Now these are very special questions in the way they're worded, because they are worded in such a way that you're asking for something positive. So let me just share with you how I first became aware of this notion of appreciative questions. I remember a number of years ago, I don't know how long, I was at a national seminar and I heard a speaker named Fred Lee. Fred Lee had written a book called If Disney Ran Your Hospital. And it was a great book, and he tended to travel around the country talking about this notion, if Disney ran your hospital. But at this seminar, the piece that stood out for me the most in his session was a story he told. He said that there had only been a couple times that hotels had exceeded his expectation, because he stayed at a lot of hotels. And the one he talked about that I really appreciated. He came out in the morning ready to go to his work, and it had snowed the night before, and so there was a covering of snow over everything. When he got to his car, there was a note stuck in the front windshield wiper, and that's usually not a good thing, but he pulled out the note, and it said, "Snow removed courtesy of building services." And sure enough, the snow had been brushed off all of his windows, and as he looked around the parking lot, there were notes in everyone's windshield wiper. And he thought, oh my goodness, that's never happened to me before. So he left because he had to leave. When he came back at the end of the day, he asked if he could speak to the hotel manager, which he did. And he said, you know, this is a great level of customer service. How do you achieve this kind of customer service at your hotel? And the manager said to him, you know, it just so happens that I'm having one of my weekly management meetings tomorrow morning, and I'd like to invite you to attend if you're available. So Fred Lee was available. He went to her management meeting, and everyone was there. The head of food service, laundry, front desk, building and maintenance, which is the guy that did the snow removal. And what he learned was that the manager, hotel manager, started every meeting with the same question. And what she asked was, who could share something you've done lately to delight a guest? Who could share something you've done lately to delight a guest? Now, if you think about that question, it also conveys an expectation. She's really telling everyone that she expects them to be doing things to delight guests. And so that is an example of an appreciative question, because she's asking for people to share some type of success. And the beauty of appreciative questions is really on this third bullet point. You can create an appreciative question to encourage any behavior that you want to see more of from your staff. And hearing all the positives creates inspiration and energy. Let me just give you an example. Let's imagine you've just hired several new people, and you are hoping that when they start, that they will be welcomed, that they will be treated well by your staff, they'll be mentored, and they'll be welcomed. So you could create an appreciative question that you might ask at every staff meeting, and it might sound something like, who has done something lately to make one of our new staff members feel really welcome, or to help one of our new staff members learn something? So that's a great example of an appreciative question, and I want to give you some more. Just a few of my favorite appreciative questions. I've collected many of these over the years. So the first one is one that you could use just making informal rounds in your department. You might ask a staff member to share something they learned about one of their patient preferences that help them personalize care. Of course, you could be asking about anything that you're focused on, about pain relief, about various things. Another favorite that you could actually use in a huddle, if you have short huddles each shift, you might ask, who would like to recommend a coworker for making your shift go better? Who would like to recognize a coworker for making your shift go better? The third one you might ask in a department meeting or staff meeting. Describe a situation when you worked with people in another department or discipline to meet a patient's needs. Now, I want to tell you, if this is new to your staff, what works really well is to maybe write this question down on a whiteboard or blackboard at the beginning of the meeting and let them know that you'll come back to it later. That way you're allowing people time to think. The next one you could actually use in a new employee interview when you're interviewing someone. You might ask them to recall a time when they successfully resolved a conflict with a coworker and what made that possible or how they did that. Anytime you can be asking an interviewee to share a story, it's a good thing. And then the second last one could be when you make patient rounds. After you find out how the patient's doing and what we can do to make them feel better, you might ask them to share something one of your staff members did that made them feel really well cared for. And then finally, another one in a huddle. These can be just so simple. You might ask, who has done something lately to help the next shift? Or if it's an outpatient setting, who's done something lately to help, the next caregiver? So I just wanted to share some of those and reinforce all the different situations that you can use appreciative questions. I love to use them when I'm making rounds, when I'm visiting a hospital, just something simple like, I'd love to hear something that's going well in this department, or what are you feeling especially good about that's happening in your unit. So those are appreciative questions, and I'm going to share the next topic, appreciative expectations. But first, we're going to pause for questions. Mary is back with us, so she'll be able to do the last section. But let me remind you what Chris said, and that is there is a chat box on your screen so that if you'd like to ask a question, feel free to do that, and we'll answer it now or at the end of the session. So Chris, do we have any questions?
Okay, well, we have one that just came in. Let's read this one here. Let's see, how do I keep myself inspired and engaged?
Oh boy, is that a good one. You know, I'm going to have Mary add. I'll start the answer, but I know, Mary, you've got some good techniques for that as well. I love this question because it's one of the hardest things. And my answer in terms of keeping ourselves inspired and engaged is the first thing you have to do is be mindful or aware of when you're getting depleted. I hope that all of us know how to tell when we're really kind of running out of steam and not being at our very best. And self-care is so unique. So what might help one of us might be different than the others. But I've asked this question to various people, and some themes generally are to get out of our office and spend just a little time with coworkers, especially have lunch with some of your peers. We have a really bad habit often of eating lunch at our desk, so make it a point to have lunch with others. Also, one thing that always worked for me was making rounds, particularly patient rounds. When I could hear what was going well and the difference we were making for patients, it helped me reconnect with our mission and with the overall purpose of our being in healthcare. So making rounds, and then I guess I would also say do something that works for you. It could be music. Maybe you need some quiet time to close your door for 20 minutes. So it's very unique, but in my opinion, it starts with being aware of when you are feeling depleted, when you're feeling stressed, and recognizing whatever your own cues are for that. Mary, what would you like to add?
One thing that I would like to add that really worked for me was, again, on Susan's point of knowing oneself. If I didn't get re-energized from just being with staff or being with patients and or families, I also found sometimes a 5-minute walk outside when I would most believe that I didn't have time to do that could be the most head-clearing thing I did for the day. And that for me, the reconnection to outdoors would allow me to get refocused on the things that really mattered to me and mattered to my staff. It's a really important question.
Good. I've heard a lot of people say that works for them, so thank you, Mary. All right, the next, Chris, do we have another question that may have come in?
Nope, no more questions at this time.
Okay, wonderful. So the second last big category that really is important, and Mary and I are both passionate about this, is something called articulated expectations, where you are able to share with people what you expect of them and what you need of them to help you be successful. You might think that this is only for the people that report to you, but actually there are 4 different directions that each of us in any leadership role need to focus on to be clear with what we expect of other people. Certainly with patients and families, we need to be able to share with them that we would like them to let us know when things are not going as well as they could. Perhaps when you make rounds with patients, you might ask them to let your staff know, or you could pass out your business card and ask the patient to give you a call if there's anything that you can do to help their care go better. And, you know, even as a caregiver, to share your expectations with patients in terms of pain relief and so forth. So patients and families, surely. And then for the people that report to you, obviously you need to share your vision for their success, what you expect of all your team members in terms of respect, teamwork, communication, and so forth. And I'll give you some sample language for that in a minute. Then your peers. This is not only an organization that has our own individual departments, but we've got to demonstrate great cooperation and collaboration. So you may need to have mutual expectation conversation with some of your peers, especially if your department is not getting along well with them. And then the last one on the top is the one you are most likely to not think of, and that is that your immediate supervisor needs to know from you what you need in order to be successful. Sometimes we have to remember that our immediate supervisor cannot read our mind. And so part of being an empowered leader is sharing when you need something, and whether that's education or a certain style of leadership. So we'll give you an example of that. Actually, Mary and I, in a minute, we'll do some role play. But first I want to talk to you about how you verbalize these expectations. The worst way you can probably do it is to say, I expect this, I expect that. I mean, that's not the spirit. It's not really about ordering people, but you want to do it in a language that's positive. So this is an example where, you know, let's say on the right side, the second one on the right is, I would like you to, let's say, become oriented to be in charge, or I would like you to learn a new skill. Will that work for you, or how do you feel about that? What I would like to see is, you might say, what I would like to see is all of us following the commitment to my coworker behaviors. You may have heard the webinar from my colleague Donna Wright that talked about our commitment behaviors. And the next one could be a peer. I wonder if we could both agree that, for example, you might negotiate with a peer that you would cross cover for each other when each of you goes on vacation. Then for your immediate supervisor, on the bottom left, what would help me succeed is for you to. And then you've got some other examples. On the left at the top might be one that you could use with patients. This is what you can expect from me, and this is what I'd like to expect from you. Or maybe you start the other way. I would like you to feel free to call me. I'm the manager of this department, and it would really help me if you let me know as a patient that if there's anything we can do to help you feel better. And then this is what you can expect from me if you do call me, things like that. So that's articulated expectations. So let's see what this actually looks like. So Mary and I are going to role play a little bit, and I am going to imagine that I am a manager and I have been given so many projects and priorities that I really feel like I'm not doing a good job of anything. And I'm really feeling overwhelmed. And believe me, I've actually been in this situation. And so I certainly need to have an expectation conversation with my immediate supervisor to ask for what I need. So let's imagine that Mary is my immediate supervisor. Mary, I would probably make an appointment with you, and I'd probably say, Mary, thank you so much for meeting with me. I am in a dilemma that I need your help with. I find that I have so many things on my plate right now that I'm afraid I'm not doing a good job of anything. And I am really committed to doing a good job. However, I am not sure if I'm prioritizing the way you would want me to. So I'd like to ask you if you would help me go through my priorities, and I'd like to make sure that I know from you what you think the most important things are. Would that be possible?
Yes, Susan, thanks for coming to me with your concerns. Let me assure you, you are doing a good job, and let's be sure that where you're spending your time aligns with what our strategic objectives are. Let's sit down and talk about it.
Great. Thank you, Mary. That will really help me. There might also be situations where you're given a new department or a new assignment that you don't feel you have enough knowledge for. So you might ask your supervisor for some mentoring, for some education, whatever it might be. So the next scenario, I am going to imagine that I'm a manager of the emergency department, and it's really apparent to me that my emergency department staff are in conflict with the radiology staff. They're always complaining, backbiting, kind of bickering with the radiology staff, and I am very concerned that this is interfering with best patient care. So I'm going to make an appointment with Mary. Mary is now the head of radiology, and so I guess I might start the conversation by saying, Mary, I really would like us to work together to figure out how we can help our staffs work together more collaboratively. I don't know if you've noticed, but it seems like there's been a lot of bickering and complaining between both of our teams, and I just really feel that we need to show a unified front and work together to resolve this so that our staff don't kind of pit us against each other. How do you think we might approach this, Mary?
Well, Susan, I actually agree with you. I've heard a lot of complaints from my staff about your staff as well. So let's figure out how we help them both focus on it's the patient and family that really matter.
Great. Okay. So I can imagine a lot of situations where you can use this notion of articulated expectations, and a lot of times it winds up being a mutual expectation conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to Mary to talk about one of the most impactful tools that we can use as a manager, and that is leading through shared governance. Mary?
Thank you, Susan. The topic of shared governance has so much to do with how we as leaders empower and engage our staff in the work of patient care delivery. I really believe that it is we as leaders who set the tone for the fact that no one knows the work better than people at the point of care. And it's through their interactions in shared governance that help them to actualize that philosophy. So let's start with talking about what is shared governance. Most of us know it as a process for decentralized decision making. As I just mentioned, this is a way to ensure that decisions that are made that affect patient care delivery are made by the people closest to the point of impact. It's also an empowerment in action. It uses councils of first-line staff members to prove to them that not only is this a philosophy that they know the work the best, but also that this is the greatest, leads to the greatest outcomes for patients and families. And when we go to change work processes, whether that's through lean methodology or other methodologies of efficiency, it is the staff that need to be involved in the structure of unit of shared governance allows them to do that. The shared governance is also a way to continuously improve care and service, so that as healthcare evolves and changes, which as we know it's doing rapidly these days, it allows the staff to not feel like the change is something else that's being put upon them, but rather it is something that they have an active role in. Lastly, as we know, staff councils are really the effective means by which team and healthy work environments are created. That cannot really be, we can state an expectation as a leader of what we believe are our commitment to coworker behaviors and actions, but it is actually the team that makes that come to life. And the power of having a healthy work environment in terms of what it means in retention and re-recruitment of your best staff cannot be underemphasized. The role that we have then as leaders for shared governance means that we have to understand what is ours to own and what is the staff's to own. And this is easier said than done. Our ideal role for any shared governance structure is that of mentor and coach. And depending upon the how mature your shared governance structure is, how long your council has been functioning as a council, will have a lot to do with how we as leaders mentor and coach them. Sometimes, particularly new councils and or new leaders may need help in structure, such as how do I put together an agenda? How do I keep a meeting on time? How do I get people off one topic and on to another? How do we make sure that there's a closed accountability loop for what's going to happen post-meeting? How do we do decision-making by consensus versus voting? As we know, voting means many times that someone feels like they've won and someone else feels like they've not won or that they've lost. Consensus is how do we save space and hold space for people to dialogue long enough that they can say, even if it's not my decision, I can agree with this one through the trial phase or whatever of a project they might be working on. There's also ways to coach and mentor, through the process, which is many times our staff don't know who in another department they need to collaborate with. They don't have the contact name, they don't have the number. Our systems, as we know, whether we're in ambulatory care or we're in acute care, are convoluted and complex. And just knowing the players, many times that's where our role as coaches to shared governance comes in. And then in leadership, how do we help people in their shared governance structure to define roles and responsibilities? How do we help them write a charter so that people understand what's ours to own? The whole idea of what level of authority do they have for decision making is something that you also may need to be able to help them with. We need to be sure that as a coach and mentor, we're not seen as the decision maker, but rather we are seen as the person who is helping them to make the right decision. We are helping them to understand who the other stakeholders might be, when we need to pause, when we need to trial a small test of change versus a whole-scale change of a work process. And then how to recognize successes, how to celebrate successes, who we want to involve in the celebration of the success, how to really, those are ways that through our coaching and mentoring we keep them inspired. There's a few things that we then as leaders need to avoid when it comes to helping lead our shared governance structures. And in one word, it's really avoiding being too directive. We need to seek advice from the council about when they need our presence at a meeting. Is it that we negotiate that we'll come for the first 15 minutes or we'll come for the last 15 minutes? Is it that we will drop in as time allows during their hour or 2-hour meeting? Is it that they'll call us when they need us? We want to avoid having the shared governance structure operate in isolation in a parallel sphere away from and totally separate from us as leaders. We need to be in collaboration but not directing. Also, we need to be sure that we don't rescue them from every obstacle. They will make mistakes. That's what success is built on, is a series of trial and error and learning from our something that didn't go well so that we create a better structure next time. We also need to demonstrate that we trust them, that a project that they choose to work on to change their work environment, healthy work environment, we might have approached that issue differently, but we need to trust and go with their decision when they can feel that they own the outcome. And then we need to be sure that we do not take credit for their work. Also, as leaders, we have the opportunity to invite them to come and share with our peers or with other structures or with other councils when something has really happened successfully within our shared governance structure. Invite the chair or the co-chair to come and tell the story versus us telling the story about our staff. So there's a lot of ways that we can coach and mentor them without directing. If you look at the next slide, this is really an illustration of the impact of shared governance in all of the arenas in which that are affected by a robust shared governance structure that touches every one of these aspects. The work environment I've mentioned, engagement I've mentioned, professional practice and evidence-based practice, and quality and safety are also very much affected by a robust shared governance structure. I'd like to give you, to talk about some successes that Susan and I have both witnessed at many different client locations. And I have an example of one that is really one of my favorites that lifts up every aspect demonstrated on the previous bubble slide. I was working in an organization implementing relationship-based care, and the shared governance structure of the orthopedic unit and the shared governance council of the PACU unit worked together over the course of several months about streamlining and making quality improvement in the pain score of people who were post knee and hip replacement patients. They noticed that the pain score was always under control as they left the PACU, but by the time they got to the nursing unit, often the patient's pain was out of control. And they realized that this wasn't anyone's fault. This is something that we, working together, could really help to manage. And as I mentioned, over the course of several weeks, they were able to ensure that patients who left the PACU with a pain score of 3 were successfully moved to the nursing unit, and their pain score was never over 5 by the time they got settled. Previously, it had many times escalated to a level of 7 or 8. And so, again, this demonstrated that they used the literature, they used their professional practice, they owned this, it improved quality and safety. Clearly, it made people feel proud of what they were doing and clearly engaged people and empowered them in the result. Susan, do you have an example as well?
I do. A couple that I'm thinking of, we use shared governance councils a lot in our work to implement our caring philosophy called relationship-based care. And so I'm one that really knocked my socks off. We had just put together a social work council of social workers at a large organization, and part of their work was to identify an innovation project that would have a huge impact on patients. And just about that same time, they got a list from administration of the most frequent users of services, patients that would come in the emergency department like every week and just really overuse the services of the organization. So the Social Work Council, this brand new council, decided to take on these patients that were always seeking services, especially through the ED, and they developed an entire new process of an assessment of them, and then they would have cohort meetings with a regular group of patients, and I don't remember the whole process, but they implemented this and the results were spectacular. These patients had significant reductions in the use of an emergency department and some of the other outpatient services. So this process that they had developed became a permanent part of their department. And then I just read an exemplar from a neonatal ICU a couple weeks ago from their Shared Governance Council, and they had great data before and after on central line infections. They had discovered that their metrics showed they were significantly above the national benchmark in infections with their central lines in the babies, and put together a whole process, and they were able to reduce the infection rate to below the national benchmark. So it's just really amazing what the impact that these councils can have, often on clinical quality, but also on relationships with each other. So those were the two examples that came to mind, Mary. What else would you like to say?
I just think that the last point that we'd like to make is the importance of celebrating the successes of these councils. That in itself, celebrating their successes, is what energizes and engages and empowers them as well.
Okay, so we have one slide that we want to invite you to use after the webinar. You know, so many times you go to education and then as soon as you're finished, you get back in the routine work. But we have recommended that you have discussion and dialogue after the webinar that would help deepen the learning today. So we invite you to take one or two of these questions with your leadership team, especially if you've got some type of leader of a meeting. You can reinforce and deepen the learning from this webinar by engaging in a dialogue among your team with one or two of these questions at a time. So we really encourage you to help sustain the learning by using these questions for reflection. And now it is actually time for us to hear what's on your mind. I hope that some of you have shared what questions you have for Mary and I. So Chris, do we have some additional questions?
Sure, we've got a few coming in here, and if anyone wants to send some more, and that would be great. Our first question is, I don't have any budget money for celebrations such as pizza parties. Any suggestions for celebrations that don't cost money?
Mary?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just ran across an article a couple of weeks ago highlighting that our staff, are far more engaged and inspired by a manager, by a boss who recognizes and appreciates them and thanks them for their contribution to the work and the success of the department and the unit than they are by things that cost money, such as pizza parties. Obviously, we all like that social gathering impact, but staff also really appreciate being recognized by their leaders for doing a good job. And many times, you know, that's something that requires our presence and our attention to detail and our focusing on them and on what's important, even under tight budgetary constraints. Those types of celebrations and recognitions are always at our disposal.
And you know, Mary, I remember learning a recipe for the most meaningful type of thank you or recognition. And I remember that it needed to have 3 pieces. That the first part of the recipe is sharing with the staff what you noticed, specifically, you know, what they did. The second piece was why it was important, you know, why whatever that was had an impact or what it had an impact on. And then the last piece, of course, you know, was the magic words, which are thank you. And so this really ties back, Mary, to the point that you always make about carrying little notes or Post-its with you. I think sometimes when you're making patient rounds or staff rounds is the ideal time to be collecting and providing these recognitions. So Chris, do we have another question?
Yeah, so I'm a new leader who is now managing people I used to work side by side with. Any words of wisdom about how to manage this new relationship, managing my peers?
Mary, would you like me to start with that one and then you can chime in?
Sure.
You know, that's not a comfortable thing always to be promoted from within, especially if some of your peers had also applied for the position. But just 2 words of advice. One goes back to one of our very first points, and that is, even though you know your colleagues that used to be peers, we strongly recommend you meet with them individually, because now you're wearing a new hat, so to speak. You're meeting with them as their supervisor, and so that little format for the individual meetings is important. And the other thing is to remember that your very first staff or department meeting is really important. It's your debut. It's your opportunity for them to see you for the first time as a leader, you know, and you're going to stand up. You're going to talk about your vision for the unit, kind of your expectations for how people will work together, your expectations for care of the patient, and you want to also spend a lot of time listening to your staff. So try to imagine that you're a leader for a brand new department, because I think you need to do much the same, even if it's your existing department, as you would if it were a new department. And so I guess that's my first thought. Mary, what would you add?
The only other thing that I would add, I agree, Susan, is that sometimes if we just speak out loud, that this may feel awkward for some. It may also feel awkward for me as the new leader, but that you concentrate not on the awkwardness, but instead concentrate on your excitement and concentrate on your vision for how you'd like to see us be together as a team. I think that just sometimes being vulnerable enough to admit that it may be awkward at first, but really leave it concentrating on your vision for the future and how excited you are.
Great. I remember one other thing I learned along the way, and that is how to handle it if you had a peer that also applied for the job. So essentially you got promoted and someone else that had applied, you know, did not get the promotion. My suggestion about that is to meet with them right away and talk about their strengths and get them involved in some special project, or ask them to help you with something that's really one of their best skills, because you want to talk to them, you know, that you think they had wonderful qualifications, and you hope that you can take advantage of some of their skills and work well together, and if you can, you know, just kind of get over the awkwardness, but most importantly, engage them in some really important part of the work that is going to be in the future.
So I want to thank Mary and Susan for presenting today and for your time. Thanks so much. Take care.